The news broke like a lightning bolt across the world, and for a moment, everything seemed to stop. It wasn't a tabloid rumor, it wasn't a speculative headline, and it wasn't the usual swirl of royal gossip that people could dismiss with a laugh. It was official. It came directly from the palace, and it carried a weight that the public could feel instantly, even before they fully understood it. The announcement was brief, carefully worded, and unusually restrained. The palace confirms Prince William must temporarily step back from duties due to a serious personal matter. One sentence, one shockwave, one question hanging in the air. What could possibly be serious enough to pull the future king away from the throne he has been preparing for his entire life? Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. People stared at their screens. Phones buzzing, televisions flashing alert banners, notifications stacking like falling dominoes. Some gasped. Some sat in silence. Some immediately began calling family members as if sharing the news would somehow make it less unsettling. Because Prince William wasn't just a royal figure. He wasn't just a ceremonial presence. He was the symbol of continuity, the steady hand, the reassuring face, the heir the public trusted. The one who was supposed to carry the monarchy into a new era with dignity, modernity, and calm. So if he was stepping back, even temporarily, something had to be very wrong. But what was it? That was the question everyone asked first. And then the second one followed, heavier, sharper, and more chilling. Why wasn't the palace saying more? Because normally, when there is news like this, the palace does one of two things. They either deny completely, aggressively, and swiftly, or they provide details, carefully curated ones. Yes, but details nonetheless. But this time, there was neither. Just silence. A silence that felt louder than words. A silence that seemed to hint at something deeper, more delicate, more urgent. A silence that made the public uneasy in a way they hadn't felt since the days of Diana, when the monarchy tried to control narratives that were already spiraling beyond their grasp. But this wasn't the 90s. This wasn't a scandal. This wasn't media warfare. This was something different. Something personal. Something the palace clearly did not want to explain. And that was exactly why speculation spread faster than the announcement itself. Was it medical? Was it emotional? Was it connected to recent pressures? Was it related to Kate? Was it about the children? Was it something that had been hidden for months, bubbling beneath formal smiles and staged photo ops? Or was it something that emerged suddenly, unexpectedly, in a way that forced the palace to react rather than plan? The public wanted answers, but the palace wasn't giving them. And that was when anxiety shifted into something else, curiosity, the type that twists in the mind, the type that keeps people awake at night replaying possibilities, the type that explodes into conversation at work, in cafes, across social media, and in living rooms where families leaned forward as if waiting for the next scene of a suspense film. Because no matter how much people claimed not to care about royals, they cared about this. They cared because it felt different. It felt historic. It felt like the start of something bigger, something with consequences, something that could alter the future of the monarchy itself. But before anyone could process the shock, another realization followed, one that deepened the unease. Prince William had not been seen in public in the hours leading up to the announcement. Not leaving an engagement. Not stepping into a car. Not smiling for cameras. Not waving. Not speaking. Not reassuring. Nothing. He seemed to disappear. And in the world of royalty, absence is never accidental. So people went searching for the last moment he had been seen. They replayed footage. They compared timestamps. They analyzed posture, expression, movement. They examined every detail the way investigators search for clues at a crime scene. And what they found only made the mystery more unsettling. In his most recent appearance, William seemed composed, focused, and entirely normal. No tremor in the voice. No visible distress. No sign that anything was wrong or about to change. Which led to an even more disturbing question. Could something have happened between then and now? Something sudden, something urgent, something that demanded immediate withdrawal? Or had he been hiding something? The palace insisted this was temporary. That word became its own entity, repeated in headlines, whispered in conversations, clung to by those who didn't want to imagine the alternative. Temporary, temporary, temporary. But temporary could mean days, or weeks, or months, and the palace did not clarify which. They chose that word because it was safe, vague, and flexible. A word that allows room for adjustment. A word that could soften impact without promising stability. And that choice alone was enough to make the world uneasy, because everyone knew what was happening simultaneously in the monarchy. King Charles was facing his own medical battles. The public already sensed vulnerability at the top. The monarchy felt fragile in a way it hadn't in generations. Stability depended on William. He was the anchor. And if the anchor was removed, even for a moment, what did that mean for the ship? Commentators began appearing on live broadcasts. Some looked tense. Some looked confused. Some looked like they were choosing words very carefully, aware that the wrong phrasing could set off panic. They repeated the announcement. They analyzed tone. They speculated delicately. But none of them could provide what viewers wanted most, certainty. And then people began wondering something else. Something almost too uncomfortable to voice aloud. Was this about health? Or was this about something the palace didn't want the public to know? Because health issues allow sympathy. Other matters invite scandal. And that was when the public's imagination began to stretch in every direction. Could it be exhaustion? Could it be stress? Could it be a private diagnosis? Could it be something involving Kate? Could it be something involving his father? Could it be something involving the crown itself? The public remembered the quiet period when Kate disappeared from view. The weeks without photos. The carefully edited images. The strange explanations. The whispers. The theories. They remembered how the palace insisted everything was fine, until finally admitting it wasn't. So now, with William, people were asking, is this another situation where the truth comes weeks after the denial? The timing felt too familiar, too parallel, too synchronized. Some asked a chilling question. Were William and Kate facing something together? Others wondered something even more haunting. Were they preparing the public for a transition they didn't want to say aloud yet? Because William stepping back, even temporarily, shifts the balance of the monarchy. It creates space. It creates uncertainty. It creates opportunity for speculation. And speculation, once unleashed, does not return quietly. And that was when a far more dramatic possibility entered the conversation, one that no broadcaster dared speak, but millions whispered privately. What if this serious personal matter affects the line of succession? It sounded dramatic. It sounded extreme. But the announcement itself felt extreme. Because there was another detail, small, subtle, but impossible to ignore. The palace chose to release the statement at a time when they normally do not issue major communications. It was off pattern, out of rhythm, and royals operate on rhythm. When rhythm breaks, something is wrong. So the public kept refreshing their screens, waiting for clarification that never came. They waited for images, none appeared. They waited for reassurance, none arrived. They waited for William to speak, but he remained silent. And that silence, more than anything else, was what made the moment feel historic. The world began holding its breath. Because if the future king could be pulled away from duty, what could possibly come next? And that is where the story truly begins. Because what followed the announcement was even more unsettling, more mysterious, and more revealing than anyone expected. The signals were there. The patterns were there. The shifts behind the scenes were happening long before the public noticed them. And now that the announcement has been made, those small details suddenly matter in a way no one realized before. Because sometimes the truth doesn't arrive in one statement. Sometimes it arrives in pieces. And those pieces are already starting to surface. No one expected the alert to come when it did. It wasn't a holiday. It wasn't a national event. It wasn't a date tied to anything symbolic or ceremonial. It was an ordinary day, an ordinary hour, an ordinary news cycle, right up until it wasn't. The notification banners flashed across devices in red, the kind used only for emergencies, national events, or disruptions of global importance. People thought at first it must be political news, international conflict, or some kind of public safety alert. But then they saw the words. The palace confirms Prince William must temporarily step back from duties due to a serious personal matter. And suddenly, ordinary evaporated. The initial shock wasn't just about what was said. It was about how it was said. Carefully chosen words. No flourish. No ceremonial language. No reassurance built into the phrasing. Just a statement that left the audience hanging in suspense. The palace never uses direct language unless it has to. Everything is normally wrapped in tradition, in history, in slow and softened framing. But this statement felt different. It felt tight, rushed, heavy, and that alone told the public there was more beneath the surface than the message revealed. People froze mid-task. Forks hovered above dinner plates. Teachers paused mid-sentence. Drivers pulled over to reread the notification. Even those who proudly claimed to be uninterested in royalty found themselves reading the words twice. Because this wasn't about glamour, pageantry, or celebrity. This was about the future of the British monarchy. The person next in line to the throne had stepped back. Suddenly, without warning, and without explanation beyond a phrase that carried more weight than clarity. The media scrambled. News desks lit up like cockpit dashboards. Producers barked instructions. Presenters straightened papers, pressed earpieces deeper, and stared into cameras with the kind of solemnity reserved for events that would be replayed in history documentaries decades later. The tone was immediate, tense, electric. Good evening. We have breaking news from Kensington Palace. People leaned in. Viewers felt it. Listeners felt it. Even those in public spaces, airports, gyms, train stations, felt a shift as screens changed and the same headline appeared everywhere at once. The collective reaction formed before anyone could articulate it. This is serious. And then the questions began, not whispered but spoken aloud, urgently, instinctively. What happened? Is he all right? Why now? Was there a warning sign? Is this sudden? Where is he? And the question that spread fastest, like a spark jumping rooftops. Why isn't the palace telling us more? Because that was the part that unsettled people most, the absence of detail. A future king steps away from duty, yet the palace declines to elaborate. The silence created a void, and voids demand to be filled. Speculation rushes in where information does not exist. And speculation began instantly. On social media, hashtags formed within minutes. Threads built into thousands of comments. People refreshed and refreshed, hoping for updates that didn't come. Live chats filled with worry, confusion, and theories. Not the wild, sensational kind, at least not yet, but the anxious kind. The human kind. Is it health-related? Is it family-related? Is it stress? Is it grief? Is it connected to the king's condition? Some asked the question no broadcaster would dare verbalize. Is there a succession issue? Because whether people admit it or not, the monarchy is a stabilizing symbol. When the heir steps back, even temporarily, the public feels the ground shift under their feet. If the monarch is unwell and the future monarch is suddenly unavailable, the nation looks at the institution and wonders who is steering it. Commentators began appearing on air, some blinking rapidly as if trying to process information they didn't yet have access to. They repeated the same fragments. We have limited details. The palace is not expanding on the statement. We do not yet know the duration, and the phrasing became its own form of messaging. Limited details meant controlled messaging. Not expanding meant withholding. Duration unknown meant uncertainty. And uncertainty is the enemy of calm. Then came the secondary reaction, not shock this time, but memory. People recalled earlier periods of unexplained royal absence. Kate's disappearance from view for weeks. The digitally altered photograph incident. The way the palace insisted nothing was wrong until they could no longer maintain the facade. The public remembered how reassurances had been issued then delayed, softened then revised. And that memory layered onto the present moment, expanding unease into something wider, heavier, more complicated. A feeling formed that no one wanted to say aloud, but everyone felt anyway. We've seen this pattern before. And if the pattern was repeating, what did that imply? Some people immediately turned to the last time William had been publicly seen. They replayed footage, studying the way one might examine an old photograph for signs they previously missed. They noted his expression, his pacing, his posture, his tone. Everything appeared normal, too normal, which led to a deeply unsettling thought. Was he concealing something? Or had something happened after that appearance? Something that changed circumstances in a matter of hours? In breaking news environments, silence is a character, a looming one, a meaningful one, and the palace remained silent after the statement. No spokesperson emerged. No footage was released. No photo was provided. Not even the usual sources close to the family circulated comforting sound bites. The absence of follow-up felt intentional. Journalists began comparing timestamps. They noticed something no casual reader would catch. The announcement came at a time of day when major royal communications are almost never released. It bypassed the normal procedural rhythm. That could only mean one of two things. Either the situation developed unexpectedly, or the timing was chosen strategically to get ahead of something. Which possibility seemed more likely? That question spread faster than the announcement itself. It spread through living rooms, comment sections, WhatsApp groups, office conversations, and newsrooms that suddenly felt like crisis centers. Meanwhile, broadcasters softened their voices the way they do when discussing sensitive subjects: illness, loss, national trauma. But they didn't say those words. They couldn't. They didn't have confirmation. And so they spoke around the subject, constructing carefully balanced verbal frameworks designed to acknowledge seriousness without assuming cause. Viewers noticed the phrasing: personal matter rather than health matter, temporarily stepping back rather than recovering. The distinction mattered. Words always matter in palace language. If the issue were purely medical, wouldn't they have said so? If the issue required sympathy, wouldn't they have guided the public toward compassion? If the issue were brief, wouldn't they have given a timeline? But they didn't. And that opened the doorway to the most unsettling interpretation of all. The palace was buying time. For what? To stabilize? To assess? To coordinate? To prepare? To shield? And then came the reactions from around the world: leaders, analysts, historians, diplomats. Their tone was measured, but their rapid responses revealed something the public hadn't yet considered. Prince William is not just a domestic figure. His role affects international relationships, strategic alliances, Commonwealth stability, and global diplomatic continuity. When he steps back, even briefly, other governments notice. Not because of scandal, but because of structure. And the world sensed structure trembling. But the public wasn't thinking about geopolitical implications. They were thinking about something far more human. Is he safe? Is he well? Is he under pressure? Is he overwhelmed? People who grew up watching William, who saw him as a boy walking behind his mother's coffin, felt a personal tug, an emotional thread that connected memory to present. The idea that he might be struggling, suffering, or facing something heavy triggered a protective instinct rather than a gossipy one. Parents felt it. People who experienced grief felt it. People who admired Diana felt it. People who saw him as the monarchy's stabilizer felt it, which made the silence even harder to sit with. Because the palace is never silent without reason. And that reason, whatever it was, felt big. Then news outlets began repeating one sentence that sent a new ripple through the public. No further details are expected at this time. Not expected, not scheduled, not forthcoming. Which meant the public was left in an information vacuum. And vacuums pull. They draw attention. They heighten emotion. They make even ordinary developments feel like clues. People began searching for anomalies. And they found them. A canceled appearance here. A removed media briefing there. A deleted calendar notice. Individually, they were nothing. Collectively, they became a pattern. A pattern that predated the announcement. Which meant the palace knew something was coming. And if the palace knew, why didn't they say so earlier? Theories sharpened. Interest intensified. The emotional atmosphere shifted from shock to anticipation. Because if this was the first announcement, would there be another? Broadcasters started using phrases like, "We may learn more in the coming days. This could develop further. We are monitoring updates." And then came the moment that turned curiosity into tension. The Royal Press Office stopped responding to inquiries. No comment. No clarification. No correction. No denial. Silence became the official position. And silence is never accidental. Viewers felt their heartbeat quicken. What could possibly require the future king to withdraw without explanation? What could be serious enough to override duty, schedule, and national expectation? What could be personal enough that the palace refused to elaborate? And then came the most chilling realization of all. The announcement didn't just reveal something. It concealed something. Something that was already beginning to surface behind the scenes. Something that would soon become impossible to hide. Because this was only the first sign that something much larger was unfolding. The first whispers didn't come from journalists. They didn't come from commentators. They didn't even come from royal watchers who monitor every facial expression, every gesture, every line in every palace announcement. No, the first whispers came from somewhere far more revealing, far more telling, and far more unsettling. They came from inside the palace walls, from the people who never speak. Staff members, attendants, officials who normally carry on with perfectly neutral expressions, unchanged no matter what storms rage around the royal family. But not this time, because in the hours following the announcement, something unusual happened. People who normally ignored press inquiries suddenly refused to make eye contact. Those who typically moved with calm precision began hurrying through corridors. Assistants who always offered the same polite smile now appeared pale, tense, and tightly wound. And it wasn't just one or two. It was dozens. The atmosphere inside royal residences shifted, and those who observed it felt it instantly. Something was wrong. Something big. Something the palace was trying to contain. And that silence, that tight, controlled silence, told insiders far more than any public statement ever could. Because palace staff are used to crisis. They are used to scandal. They are used to speculation. They are used to handling appearances during upheaval. But this wasn't scandal-like behavior. This wasn't the contained chaos of media storms. This was something else. Something deeper. Something that felt like fear. What were they afraid of? That was the question the first whispers tried to answer. Not aloud, but behind closed doors, in low voices, in rooms with doors pushed shut and curtains deliberately drawn. Because even within the palace, people are aware that walls have ears. But whispers still began circulating. And as they did, patterns formed. The first pattern was clear. Communication channels had tightened. Normally, information flows through the palace in subtle ways. A comment here, a glance there, a shift in tone. But now, everything felt constricted, locked down, controlled. Even staff who normally shared harmless observations, the type that never leave the building, stayed silent. The second pattern was harder to ignore. Schedules were being rearranged at the last possible moment. Meetings postponed, briefings canceled, vehicles rerouted, security repositioned. Not dramatically, not publicly, but internally. And that kind of disruption only happens when something is happening behind the scenes that requires concealment. The third pattern was the most concerning of all. Senior staff members were suddenly unavailable. Not unavailable as in busy. Unavailable as in unreachable. Phones unanswered. Offices unopened. Assistants responding on their behalf with vague phrasing like, they are occupied, or they will not be in today, or they are attending to internal matters. And when senior staff disappear, it means coordination is happening at a high level. Coordination the public is not yet meant to see. Meanwhile, the press office, usually the first department to stabilize a story, went dark. No additional statements. No clarifications. No guidance. This was unprecedented. Even in moments of national shock, abdications, deaths, accidents, scandals, the press office always maintained presence. But now, they were not reinforcing anything. They were not shaping narrative. They were retreating. And retreat always signals vulnerability. Which is why the whispers grew louder. At first, the whispers followed the most logical assumption, that the serious personal matter was health-related. The phrasing fit. The timing matched. The suddenness aligned. But then something complicated that assumption, and it was something insiders noticed before anyone else. There were no medical transport movements. No medical specialists entering private areas. No emergency response vehicles positioned discreetly out of view. No physicians arriving through staff entrances. Nothing. If this were a sudden medical crisis, there would have been movement. The palace can hide many things, but not the arrival of external medical personnel. Someone always sees. Someone always leaks. But there was no such activity, which led to the second wave of whispers, the ones that chilled even those accustomed to royal confidentiality. What if the matter wasn't medical? What if it was personal in another way? That word, personal, took on a new tone. It echoed differently. It grew heavier. Because when the palace uses the word personal, it can mean many things: family, internal conflict, private developments, unspoken pressures. But insiders noticed another detail that fanned the flames. The announcement did not reference recovery. It did not reference rest. It did not reference treatment. It did not reference wellness. Instead, it referenced withdrawal. Withdrawal implies removal. Removal implies absence. Absence implies something that cannot be publicly explained. And that was when the whispers began shifting into theories. Not wild ones, not tabloid ones, but measured, cautious ones. Theories built on the behavior of those closest to William. Theories based on what was not happening rather than what was. Theories grounded in the way the palace was reacting internally. For example, one insider noticed that high-ranking advisors, the kind who normally coordinate national briefings, were meeting privately behind locked doors. Another noticed that communication between Buckingham Palace and Kensington Palace had intensified abruptly. Another noted that correspondence meant for the king's office was suddenly being redirected, and these observations pointed toward a possibility that unsettled even the most experienced staff. This matter involved more than just William, because when one royal faces a private matter, the response stays confined. But when the monarchy adjusts operations, the matter affects the institution. And then came the moment that truly ignited the whispers. A longtime palace aide, someone known for composure, discretion, and emotional neutrality, was seen wiping tears while exiting a restricted hallway. Staff members tried not to react, but everyone saw. Everyone felt the shift. Everyone sensed the weight. Tears change everything. Tears mean the matter is not minor. Tears mean people inside the palace are afraid of the truth becoming public. And that fear spread. Still, no one spoke publicly. No one revealed anything to reporters. No one broke confidentiality. But they didn't need to. Their behavior told the story before words ever did. Then another change occurred, one that made insiders exchange glances of disbelief. Royal protection officers, the most trained in controlled demeanor, became visibly tense. Officers do not react unless risk escalates. Risk can mean threat. Risk can mean instability. Risk can mean vulnerability of national significance. What could make protection officers tighten formation? What could make security reassign personnel? What could make travel plans for royals suddenly reroute? And more importantly, why now? Why immediately after the announcement? Insiders began piecing together timelines. They noticed something chilling. Security adjustments began hours before the announcement, not after, which meant William's withdrawal was not reactive. It was planned, prepared, coordinated, which led to the next wave of whispers. Was the palace preparing for this moment long before the public knew? That question spread faster than any internal rumor in years. Because if the palace knew something was coming, why release the announcement now? Why wait until this moment? What triggered the timing? And then came the whisper that made everyone fall silent. The whisper that passed from one staff member to another in the lowest possible voice. Someone else in the line of succession had been quietly briefed. No one knew who. No one knew when. No one knew why. But the idea alone was explosive. Because the monarchy only briefs successors when transition, temporary or otherwise, becomes possible. And if a briefing occurred, what did that mean for William? What did it mean for the king? What did it mean for the country? Whispers turned into tension. Tension turned into dread. But still, no one spoke aloud. Not officially. Not publicly. Not yet. Then something else happened. Something so subtle the outside world missed it, but insiders understood instantly. A set of ceremonial documents, normally kept accessible for routine protocol, were moved into secured archival storage. Only high-level transitions trigger that. That was when the whispers stopped, not because speculation faded, but because fear replaced it. Staff began avoiding conversations altogether. Phones were powered off. Doors were shut. Conversations ended when footsteps approached. And when silence replaces whispers, it means the truth is close enough to touch and dangerous enough to avoid. But then, just when insiders thought the situation could not grow more tense, something occurred that shattered the last illusion of stability. A senior communication strategist, someone deeply embedded in royal messaging, abruptly cleared their schedule and left the palace through a private exit normally used only during crisis transitions. Those who saw it exchanged looks. Everyone understood the implication. This was escalating. This was spreading. This was no longer about William alone. The whispers inside the palace were one thing, but outside its walls, the public began connecting dots of their own. And the first, the one that sharpened the mystery and shifted the tone from concern to alarm, was Kate. Because almost immediately after William's withdrawal was announced, people realized something that now seemed impossible to ignore. Kate had already vanished from public view. At first, people assumed it was coincidence, a scheduling pause, a private period, a family moment. But as the hours passed, as news commentators replayed footage of William, as analysts traced back the timeline, the realization struck with full force. Kate hadn't been seen, not in the background of a photograph, not stepping into a car, not waving from a window, not smiling through an engagement, not even in a blurry passerby shot from a member of the public. Nothing. And once the public noticed her absence, the tone of the story changed. Prince William stepping back was shocking. But Prince William stepping back, while Kate remained unseen, that was something else entirely. It wasn't just unusual, it was unprecedented. People began asking the next round of questions, sharper and more insistent than the first. Where's Kate? Was she with William? Was she the reason for the withdrawal? Was William stepping back to support her? Was this a shared crisis? Or were they facing separate issues simultaneously? The most unsettling possibility lingered in the minds of many. Was something happening within the family that the palace didn't want exposed? Because the last time Kate disappeared from public life for an extended period, the palace insisted it was routine, right up until it wasn't. The public remembered how long it took for the truth to surface. They remembered the edited photo scandal. They remembered the tone of denial. And now, seeing the pattern repeat with William, a new fear formed. Was history repeating itself? Or was this something entirely new? The broadcasters, careful, measured, trained in neutrality, began referencing Kate without naming concern. Their language shifted into coded phrasing anyone could decode. There has been limited visibility. She has not appeared in recent days. There has been reduced public presence. Reduced. Limited. Not appeared. Words chosen to stir attention without stating alarm. And it worked. People began searching online for the last official appearance of Kate. They scrolled through image archives. They looked at dates. They compared timelines to William's. And what they found was startling. Kate had vanished from the public eye before William did, which meant her disappearance wasn't a reaction to his withdrawal. It preceded it. And that changed everything. Because if Kate had quietly stepped away first, and now William was stepping back too, what did that imply? A shared personal matter? A family emergency? A situation involving their children? Or something even more delicately guarded? Something the monarchy could not risk leaking? But while the public speculated, insiders noticed something else, something harder to explain away. The staff assigned to Kate's schedule had been reassigned temporarily. Orders had been issued. Communications related to her engagements had been archived rather than postponed. This wasn't a pause. This was a freeze. And freezes only happen when the palace expects absence, not delay. Meanwhile, royal photographers, who track appearances with hawk-like precision, began reporting something unheard of. Kensington Palace had not issued a single future image embargo. No pre-approved photos. No scheduled releases. No planned media slots. This meant Kate was not expected to be seen anytime soon. And that revelation rippled outward, escalating concern into something heavier. Then came the next trigger, one that ignited public anxiety. Royal correspondents began discussing the couple together rather than separately. They shifted from speaking of William and Kate as individuals to referring to them as a unit. They stopped distinguishing their engagements. They stopped separating their public roles. Every sentence implied linkage. That's when the public began asking the question that had been hovering unspoken. Was William stepping back because of Kate? If so, why didn't the palace say so? Why use the phrase serious personal matter rather than referring to family? Why avoid even a hint of connection? Unless the connection itself was explosive. The public remembered another detail, something that resurfaced now with eerie relevance. Weeks earlier, there had been a moment, brief and barely noticed at the time, when William attended an engagement alone and appeared unusually tense. Observers had written it off as exhaustion, stress, routine pressure. But now, with Kate absent and William withdrawing, that moment took on an entirely new meaning. Had something been happening even then? Had the palace been hiding the situation for longer than anyone realized? Or had events escalated suddenly, forcing the announcement sooner than planned? These questions circulated faster than the palace could contain them. And then, A more emotional line of inquiry emerged, one that struck at the core of public sentiment. People asked not as observers, but as humans. Is Kate okay? Is she safe? Is she receiving care? Is she under pressure? Is she struggling privately while pretending publicly? The public loves Kate in a way they don't always love royals. She is seen as warm, steady, relatable, maternal. People feel protective of her, and the idea that she might be facing something painful, silently, behind palace walls, triggered a wave of concern that transcended curiosity. Mothers reacted first, then daughters, then women who saw themselves in her. Because Kate had always appeared composed, graceful, smiling, no matter what storms surrounded her. And the thought that she could be suffering, unseen and unacknowledged, created emotional friction the palace could not control. Meanwhile, insiders noticed another shift, one that intensified speculation dramatically. William's personal aide, someone who accompanies him to nearly every engagement, was seen leaving Kensington Palace carrying a sealed document case. Not a digital file, not a briefing folder, a physical, secured, hand-delivered case. These cases are used only when information cannot risk interception. What information could possibly require that level of security? And why now? Then came something even stranger, something that made royal observers sit upright. A planned appearance involving the children, George, Charlotte, and Louis, was quietly removed from the royal calendar. Not postponed, not adjusted, removed. Public appearances involving children are never canceled without explanation. That cancellation told analysts something chilling. This situation involved the family as a whole. But was it protection or containment? Theories branched. Some believed William stepped back to care for Kate. Others believed the couple withdrew together due to a shared issue. Still others wondered whether the matter concerned one of the children, something the palace would guard more fiercely than anything else. Because royal children are protected with an intensity unmatched by any other aspect of the monarchy. Their privacy is absolute. Their well-being is shielded. Their vulnerabilities are state secrets. So if the situation involved them, the silence made sense. And yet, there was another possibility, one only a few dared consider. What if Kate's disappearance and William's withdrawal were not parallel events, but the same event? What if the serious personal matter was not about him or her individually, but about them together? A strain, a fracture, a family crisis, a decision with consequences. The palace would never admit it. The public would never ignore it. The monarchy could never withstand it, which was why the next development hit like a thunderclap. A reporter asked a palace representative directly whether Kate's absence was related to William's withdrawal. The representative refused to answer. Not no. Not the princess as well. Not this is unrelated. Just refusal. And refusal, in royal language, is revelation. Because if the answer were innocuous, it would have been given. Instead, the palace chose silence. And silence confirmed connection. The media tightened their focus. Commentators recalibrated their tone. Analysts shifted from curiosity to concern. But the most unsettling reaction of all came from ordinary people, speaking not as spectators, but as citizens emotionally entangled with the story. They began saying, something is wrong. Something is being hidden. Something doesn't add up. And they were right. Because later that evening, something happened that erased any lingering sense of coincidence. A vehicle normally assigned to Kate was seen arriving at a private medical facility. Not an emergency ward, not a public hospital, but a quiet, discreet, highly protected institution associated with the highest levels of confidentiality. No one saw Kate exit. No one saw William. But the vehicle was logged, which meant someone connected to her was inside. And if she were fine, why would the vehicle be there? The palace refused to comment. Journalists who attempted to inquire were told their questions would not be acknowledged. That phrase, would not be acknowledged, has a very specific meaning in the world of royal communications. It means, there is something to acknowledge, but it cannot be spoken. Not yet. Not publicly. Not safely. And that was when the last illusion collapsed. This was no longer about William stepping back. This was no longer about Kate being absent. This was no longer about coincidence. This was about a shared crisis. A crisis the palace could not describe. A crisis the public was not meant to notice yet. A crisis that was growing too large to contain. But if the situation involved William, and Kate, and the children. Then the question became terrifyingly clear. What does this mean for the monarchy? Because a monarchy can withstand scandal. It can withstand rumor. It can withstand controversy. But it cannot withstand uncertainty in the line of succession. For many people, the moment the story shifted from unsettling to deeply alarming wasn't when William withdrew, and it wasn't when Kate disappeared from sight. It was when the public realized something far more delicate and revealing had happened, something that struck directly at the heart of the monarchy's future. At first, no one noticed. After all, George, Charlotte, and Louis are not daily public figures. They appear at select events. They are shielded. They are protected. But as tension around William and Kate grew, the public instinctively looked toward the next stabilizing image, one of the children. A school drop-off photo, a car ride glimpse, a riding lesson snapshot, even a grainy background capture taken accidentally. But there was nothing. No images. No sightings. No routine moments. Then journalists noticed something chilling. A scheduled school-related appearance. Something small, something harmless, something purely ceremonial, had been wiped from the royal engagement list. It hadn't been postponed. It hadn't been reframed. It had been erased. And that was the moment analysts realized the timeline had shifted. William stepped back. Kate disappeared. The children went unseen. 3 separate public absences, converging into one unmistakable conclusion. This was coordinated. Which meant this wasn't just a personal matter anymore. This was a family lockdown. The press tried to approach the subject carefully, very carefully. Royals can be questioned. Heirs can be scrutinized. But children? Children are sacred territory. Even the harshest broadcasters tread lightly when minors are involved. And yet, their absence was too significant to ignore. So commentators began speaking in coded language again, the kind that says everything without stating anything outright. We have not seen the whale's children in recent days. There appears to be a pause in public visibility. The family seems to be maintaining privacy at this time. Privacy. Pause. Not seen. Each word chosen like a chess move. And the public's reaction shifted once again, from curiosity to concern to something deeper. Not fear for the monarchy. Fear for the family. Because when a parent steps back, people wonder. When both parents disappear, people worry. But when the children vanish from public view as well, people feel something primal, an instinctive, protective unease. Parents watching the news felt their stomach tighten. Grandparents felt their breath catch. Ordinary people who had never cared about royalty suddenly leaned closer to their screens. Because children disappearing from view always means something. Always. And insiders noticed something even more revealing. Security around the children intensified. Not visibly, not publicly, but internally. Protection teams were reassigned. Transport protocols were altered. Access lists were updated. These aren't changes anyone outside the palace would normally detect, but whispers leaked just enough to confirm it. The children were being shielded. But from what? Possibility 1 emerged first, the gentlest interpretation. The children were being protected from public speculation about their parents. That made sense. That felt reasonable. But then something complicated that explanation, something that couldn't be dismissed. Their routines changed. George, normally transported along a predictable route, suddenly shifted schedules. Charlotte's extracurricular escorts were rerouted. Louis's movements went completely untraceable. These weren't cosmetic adjustments. These were security recalibrations. Security recalibrations mean one thing. Perceived risk. Risk can mean threat. Risk can mean vulnerability. Risk can mean exposure to something the public doesn't yet know. So the public began asking, were the children being protected emotionally or physically? And why now? Then came the detail that shook even the calmest observers. A detail confirmed quietly through education correspondence. The school had been instructed not to comment on attendance, not to confirm, not to deny, not to respond. Schools do not receive such directives unless coordinated at the highest level, which meant their absence was real. Their absence was expected. Their absence was not incidental. Meanwhile, analysts went back through recent footage, trying to see what they had missed. And suddenly, the absence of the children in the days leading up to the announcement seemed obvious. It was as if the family had slowly receded from the public eye, inch by inch, until finally disappearing entirely. Had they been preparing the public without saying so? Had the palace attempted to phase them out softly before the announcement? Or had something happened that forced the timeline to accelerate? The lack of answers created a new emotional tone, one that made this situation feel less like controlled messaging and more like containment. Then came the moment that shifted perception once again. A single photograph began circulating, not published, not endorsed, not formal. A blurry image taken from far away showed a familiar royal vehicle arriving at Windsor with darkened windows, escorted by security cars normally assigned to child transport. People stared at the photo. Some enlarged it. Some enhanced contrast. Some slowed down accompanying video. There was no clear view of passengers. But the implication was enough. The children had been moved, relocated, taken somewhere secure, which meant whatever was happening was not momentary. It was developing, expanding, deepening. And then came another detail, subtle, but devastatingly symbolic. A planned portrait release, one tied to an upcoming milestone, was pulled. Royal portraits are never canceled. Delayed, perhaps. Modified occasionally. But canceled? Never. Portraits symbolize continuity. Continuity symbolizes stability. Stability symbolizes monarchy. Canceling a portrait is like dimming a lighthouse during a storm. People feel it, even if they cannot articulate why. Experts began speaking more carefully. Emails between media outlets and palace liaisons shifted in tone. The language hardened. Unavailable. Not appropriate at this time. No anticipated release. People who track royal communication patterns saw the shift instantly. This was no longer narrative preservation. This was narrative suppression. Then came the most startling development, something the palace could not hide because too many people witnessed it. A helicopter normally used for royal child transport departed Windsor and flew a route associated with heightened security protocols. This was not usual travel. This was extraction-level routing, which meant one thing. The children were being moved out of visibility deliberately, strategically, and with logistical coordination. But why? Speculation shifted again. Some whispered this was about external threat. Others believed the family needed privacy for something medical. Still others wondered if the matter involved family dynamics the palace was terrified to expose. But the most chilling possibility was the one no broadcaster dared discuss on air. Was the monarchy preparing for a temporary or even prolonged absence of both parents? If so, who would care for the children? Who would represent the monarchy? Who would maintain continuity? Because the monarchy isn't just tradition, it's succession. And succession depends on visibility, reassurance, and symbolic stability, which was why what happened next sent shockwaves through royal reporting networks. A highly respected, long-serving royal correspondent, someone known for careful wording and measured tone, said this on live broadcast. This is the first time we have seen the entire Wales family withdraw from public visibility. The studio fell silent. Presenters shifted uneasily. Producers cut to a wide camera. Because that sentence was not analysis. It was warning, and the public felt it. Something was unfolding. Something hidden. Something serious enough that even children were being shielded from public gaze. Theories intensified. Concern deepened. Silence grew heavier. And just when people thought the situation could not become more unsettling, another development emerged. One that tied everything together with terrifying clarity. A senior official in the royal household, one who normally communicates about ceremonial preparation, was reassigned temporarily to a constitutional advisory position. This only happens under one circumstance, when scenarios involving succession must be reviewed. Not enacted. Reviewed. Contingency. Possibility. Preparation. But if contingency planning was quietly underway, what did that mean for William? What did that mean for Kate? What did that mean for the children who had vanished from sight? What did that mean for the monarchy? The public did not have those answers. The palace refused to provide them. But insiders saw the picture forming. The moment security began to change, the narrative shifted once again. Because nothing reveals the truth inside the monarchy faster than the behavior of those assigned to protect it. Royal communication staff can soften wording. Advisors can withhold details. Press secretaries can deflect. But security cannot fake protocol. Security movements are real, measurable, trackable. They change only when threat, vulnerability, or instability increases. And that is exactly what began happening around Prince William. At first, it was barely noticeable, something only the most attentive observers would catch. A slightly altered vehicle formation. A different route taken between residences. Additional officers positioned near an entrance normally guarded lightly. Small things. Quiet things. But in royal security, small changes are never small. Then came a more obvious indicator. Officers normally assigned to rotational detail were suddenly seen remaining on post for extended periods. Reassignments were halted. Rotations paused. Substitutions canceled. This happens only under 3 conditions: elevated risk, strategic protection priority, or containment of movement. Which one was this? No one knew yet, but insiders sensed the reason was escalating, not stabilizing. Next, protective perimeters shifted. Barriers were repositioned. Surveillance ranges expanded. Access points reduced. These are not cosmetic changes. These are structural responses. And structural responses always indicate something real happening behind the scenes, something that demands shielding, not messaging. Then, another detail emerged, one that made analysts lean forward and take notes. Armed officers were reassigned from secondary sites to a single primary location. This never happens unless the individual being protected must remain in one secured place, or the risk associated with travel increases. Either scenario was alarming. But which one applied to William? At this point, the public didn't yet realize how dramatically security had shifted. These changes weren't visible to civilians. They were internal, operational, coded. But people could feel something was happening, not because they saw officers, but because they didn't. Because suddenly, images of William moving between properties disappeared. No photos, no reports, no sightings, not even vague public glimpses like a car resembling his was seen exiting the gates. Instead, William vanished into protected space. This was no longer withdrawal. This was containment. But why? Was he being protected from outside forces? Or was he being shielded from public exposure? Then came something even more revealing. Specialized security personnel, rarely deployed, were observed arriving at one of the royal estates. These officers handle strategic defense coordination, high-level protection logistics, and risk mitigation response. They are not used for routine protection. They are used when the monarchy must prepare for scenarios that cannot be disclosed. Only a handful of events in modern royal history have triggered such deployment. Yet here it was happening again, silently. Meanwhile, journalists who cover royal movement noticed another anomaly. Airspace restrictions around certain properties were expanded temporarily. These restrictions are rare and require government interface. They are typically enacted only when a senior royal is present and cannot risk aerial exposure. This was not coincidence. This was not precaution. This was response. Response to what? Inside the palace, whispers changed tone once again. No longer curious, no longer speculative, but solemn. Staff members began referring to William not by his title, but by a phrase used only during moments of national implication. The heir. Titles reflect formality, but roles reflect constitutional weight. When the staff begins saying the heir, it means something has shifted from personal to national concern. But was the concern about William's well-being? Or about ensuring continuity if he could not serve? Publicly, nothing was said. Not a word. Not a press release. Not a hint. But behind the scenes, something was happening that confirmed the seriousness beyond doubt. Security coordination was merged with succession contingency protocol. This only occurs when there is a possibility, not a certainty, not an inevitability, but a possibility that the heir may not be able to fulfill duties for an extended period. This did not mean the worst, but it meant the monarchy was preparing for it. Meanwhile, another detail surfaced. One that hinted at internal emotional strain. Officers who had worked with William for years, who normally displayed unwavering composure, appeared visibly shaken. Their expressions were tight, their posture rigid, their tone subdued. Security officers do not react to rumor. They react to information, which means they knew something the public did not. Then came the questions, not from the media, but from those in government positions who interface with the palace. Was this temporary? Was this transitional? Was this precautionary? Or was something unfolding that could redefine the monarchy itself? Government liaisons were given no answers, only guidance. Proceed as though adjustments may be required. Vague, careful, loaded. Meanwhile, the public began noticing something without understanding why it mattered. William's name disappeared briefly from certain ceremonial listings. This didn't mean removal. It didn't mean replacement. It meant suspension. But suspension implies uncertainty, an unknown duration, an undetermined return. And uncertainty is the one thing royal security is designed to eliminate, which is why the next development sent another quiet shockwave through those paying attention. An intelligence-linked security advisor, someone who works only in situations involving high-sensitivity vulnerability, was brought in for consultation. This advisor has been involved historically only in terror-level threat assessments, state disruption scenarios, and moments of royal vulnerability with geopolitical implications. Why now? Why for William? Why in response to a personal matter? Unless the personal matter had national consequences. Meanwhile, royal watchers, those who track symbolism with forensic precision, noticed another change. The flags associated with William were not flown in their usual rotation. No explanation was given. No correction issued. But symbolism is never accidental in the monarchy. When symbols shift, meaning shifts. At this point, speculation intensified again, but now it wasn't just the public speculating. Experts were. Former officials were. Historians were. Even diplomats were. Because when the heir becomes unseen, protected, shielded, and logistically isolated, the monarchy moves into a phase the public rarely recognizes. Preservation mode. Preservation of what? The institution, the succession, the continuity of the crown. But continuity only becomes a priority when disruption becomes a possibility. This was no longer about William stepping back. This was no longer about Kate being absent. This was no longer about the children being protected. This was about the monarchy preparing for a scenario it hoped would never be needed. And then came the moment that confirmed this was larger than anyone realized. Security for King Charles was increased simultaneously. Dual security elevation. This has only happened twice. During wartime, threat escalation, and the days following the death of Princess Diana. Dual elevation means the monarchy is protecting both ends of succession, which can only mean one thing. Both positions are vulnerable. But how could that be? What could possibly affect both the king and the heir at the same time? Was it medical? Was it situational? Was it external? Was it internal? No one would say. No one dared. And then, just when analysts thought they understood the scale, one more development emerged, the most revealing of all. A temporary succession operations chamber was activated. This chamber is not symbolic. It is not ceremonial. It is not hypothetical. It is used only when the monarchy must be prepared to transfer active duties, temporarily or permanently, without destabilizing the nation. No announcement was made. No headline appeared. No reporter was briefed. But insiders saw the lights on inside that room. And they understood. Something was happening. Something unprecedented. Something the palace was not ready to announce. Something the public was not prepared to hear. The first sign that something had shifted from internal concern to active intervention came quietly, almost invisibly, and yet those who understood royal operations recognized the signal instantly. It wasn't a public ambulance. It wasn't flashing lights. It wasn't emergency sirens rushing through London. Instead, it was a private motorcade. Unmarked, silent, and escorted by security vehicles that moved with precision rather than urgency. The kind of motorcade used when the royals need medical expertise without public awareness. At first, only a few people noticed the convoy leaving one of the royal estates. A staff member, a grounds worker, a driver stationed at a distance. And each of them noted the same strange detail. The motorcade did not follow a standard route. It avoided populated roads, avoided major intersections, avoided areas where the public might observe or record. This was not transportation. This was concealment. The vehicles traveled to a destination that raised even more questions, a private medical facility known for one thing above all else: discretion. Not a hospital, not a clinic. A specialist assessment center used only when the royal family requires medical consultation that cannot be recorded in public logs. A facility with no waiting room, no public reception, no chance of accidental witnesses. But this time, something was different. The facility was closed to all other appointments. The entire building had been cleared, and that only happens when the matter being addressed involves someone at the highest structural level. and requires secrecy beyond standard royal privacy. Was William inside? Was Kate? Was this related to the children? No one knew. But the presence of both medical consultants and constitutional advisors at the same destination suggested something more complex than a routine assessment. Because advisors do not attend medical consultations unless the outcome may